Welcome back. Over the course of human history, people have made art. And they've also thought about art and thought about what makes art beautiful, what makes art interesting, why do people look at some paintings and not others. This next section, we're going to really zero in on what makes a painting successful. I want to focus on 6 things that really help a painting work. We're going to take them one at a time. We'll start with composition, then value, color, texture, variety, and at the end, I always like to add a little spark. Let's talk today about the design of that rectangle that you're painting on. It's called composition. As an artist, what I'm always keeping in mind is that actually I'm just filling up a rectangle with different shapes. And so I've got some choices to make about how I put those shapes into that rectangle. What artists do constantly is think about how people see and what they notice and what they look at. And I've always watched how people react to shapes inside of a rectangle. It turns out if I put a line straight through my rectangle and I call that my horizon line, the sun's coming up over the horizon. Look at what I've done here. I've got this distance and this distance are identical. So my eye sees this shape here, this top rectangle, and this bottom rectangle as being the same. And they're very balanced, but they're also sort of boring because the shape on the top is exactly the same as the shape on the bottom. Similarly, if I put let's say a big telephone pole right in the middle of this one, I've split up my rectangle into 2 identical shapes. It's actually a more boring composition. Boring! So when I use the word composition, all I'm really thinking about is the actual design of that rectangle. How do I put the shapes into that rectangle in a way that's going to be intriguing or interest my viewer? So let's make our rectangle again. And this time I'm going to avoid putting my horizon line right exactly dead center. Instead, I'm going to put it up higher. And here's all my foreground. Here's all my sky. This is actually more intriguing to me than if I would have just divided it dead center. Same thing, if I put my horizon lower. Down here, I've got more sky, less land, more interest. This is a more intriguing kind of composition or design because this shape up here is a different size than this shape down here. And this brings us to what artists call the rule of thirds, which I realize is a little bit of an oxymoron when I tell you that there are no rules. Then I like to try to break the rules of watercolor. The rule of thirds is extremely helpful. If I have a rectangle, notice it's not really a square now, it's actually more positioned like a landscape painting in sort of a long horizontal format. I need to divide this space into interesting shapes. What artists have discovered is if they keep their point of interest or the part that they want to draw your eye to in a part of the rectangle that is about 1/3 of the way down from the top and 2/3 below it, that will be more interesting. Or conversely, have it down at the bottom third. That works the same way side to side. So instead of dead center, if I put my thing I want you to notice over here about 1/3 of the way in, or over on this side about 1/3 of the way in, it's going to be more interesting to you. If you divide your rectangle into thirds in both directions, so horizontally and vertically, you've created sort of a tic-tac-toe here. And this spot right here, where those lines cross in the tic-tac-toe that you've created, those are great spots to put your main focus or the main interest that you want to have in your painting. And so if I were to paint a landscape painting and I wanted to do a painting of an old barn out in a field, rather than put that barn right in the center of my rectangle, I'm going to try to think about where I could put it in one of these 4 sweet spots right here, where the tic-tac-toe crosses. Let's try it up here. If I put my barn up here, and I have some trees around it, and some grass in the field, and a road leading to it, I've suddenly created a more interesting spot to bring your eye up to my point of interest. I chose this spot right there for my sweet spot. So the challenge to me always is to think about a new way to create some interest in my rectangular shape. How can I break that up into some really intriguing patterns? If I were to do a painting of a tree, let's say a beautiful tree in the fall, I'm going to try to think about how to hit one of my sweet spots. And so let's try down in this lower right-hand corner of our tic-tac-toe. Here's our rule of thirds rectangle. And I'm going to try this spot right down here for my tree. Let's put the tree in. Well, there it is. But what am I going to do to make this interesting? My encouragement to you is if you think first about where you put that in terms of the sweet spot, it's going to actually work out great no matter what you do around it. So that means now I've got this trunk coming out of something. That's got to be a field of some sort or some earth. And so that's going to be where I start thinking about some interesting foreground textures. I've got all this stuff up here. What am I going to do with it? Well, I could break that up with a mountain range, or I could break it up with a spectacular cloud pattern. Whatever I do, though, I'm going to think about not just splitting it right down the center. I'm not going to put my mountain dead center. Maybe I'll put that way back in the distance over here. And that's going to force me to think about maybe some other background trees or hills or something else. But what I've done is I brought your eye to my point of interest, and that's a good composition. If you think about your tic-tac-toe, rule of thirds, and choose one of those 4 sweet spots, you're on your way to a nice design for your rectangular piece of paper. So we've talked about that rule of thirds and how important it is to divide the shape of your overall painting up into other shapes that are not just exactly identical, and that will give more interest to your painting. As a landscape artist, one of the most traditional formats that I can use following that rule is the horizontal painting. So I could make my little landscape painting with mountains and trees or ocean and cliffs, and it creates sort of a horizontal format. But this format is actually so traditional and so common that I'm going to encourage you throughout this course to do what you love. Notice compositions in other artists and start to notice when an artist has broken that rule, that horizontal rule, or they've done something a little bit different. And I'm going to show a couple other examples of ways that you could divide up your painting surface. And these are just basically compositional formats that you're going to find are pretty successful. One of those is, besides the rule of thirds, where you've got all the action going across maybe this top third of your painting, there should be another spot where there's interest that goes vertical. And I'm starting to think about the shape that connects to the top of my rectangle and the shape that will connect to the bottom of my rectangle. And this connection between the top and the bottom, as well as the left and right side, forms a kind of cross shape, or a cruciform, we call it. And that cruciform shape is almost always successful in terms of a great composition. Another one is to turn the horizontal on its head and do vertical. If I were to do a forest and I wanted to have some trees in that forest, what if I just make the whole rectangle divided up into these vertical kind of shapes and forms? Maybe something like this is going to really, it's very strongly vertically directed, but that could become a really strong composition. Throwing the weight to one side or the other is a fun way to make your painting just kind of sing and have a little bit of tension and a little bit of intrigue to it. What I mean by that is, if I build up one side and I have a whole bunch of stuff over here, it doesn't matter if it's buildings or people or restaurants on a street, it's a lot of stuff. But over to the side, I'm going to put another little small thing. That is asymmetrical. It's not balanced. The teeter-totter is falling over to the heavier side. But this provides your eye with enough interest to kind of jump over here. And that creates a pretty fun design. This is also looking a lot like the cruciform. The only difference is really that I have a little bit of weight on this side to balance off with your big shape. Now, there are many, many other formats that you could use. Jackson Pollock used a format of basically no format. he started throwing his paint and creating all these intriguing designs and patterns, and it's pretty much an all-over design. I'm only showing you ones that kind of strongly are oriented or aligned to a sort of a pattern. I think the last one that I'm going to talk about here is diagonals, because diagonal shapes can also break up your rectangle in a pretty nice way, a pretty strong way. It doesn't have to just be a lightning strike to the earth, but it could be an alignment of shapes that just follows a sort of a diagonal. So composition is super important for thinking about how you lay out that painting in your mind. Have a plan for what you're going to do. Next up, we'll talk about value. See you on the next lesson. Hi, I'm Bob. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you'll go by my website at watercolorwithbob.com. That's where you'll find an interactive outline of the whole course. You can also share your work with me and your fellow students. One thing I really love about watercolor is how accessible it is. That's why I realized it was important to me to put this course out for free. That said, it would mean the world to me if you would support this work. You can like it, you could share it with your friends, you could subscribe to the channel, you could also visit the gift shop or even make a donation. Thanks so much. See you on the next lesson, and happy painting. I personally feel like this is all quite beneath me.